From the New York Times, it's the headlines. I'm Tracy Mumford. Today's Monday, August 5th. Here's what we're covering. Kamala Harris's very accelerated search for a running mate is now in its final countdown. 3 leading contenders for the spot were all in D.C. yesterday: Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Each met with Harris at her home for what's being described as a chemistry test. Harris's aides say having a good rapport with her team is a priority for her. She's expected to announce her pick tomorrow, but the Times has learned that rifts have emerged inside the Democratic Party over her choices. Progressive groups have criticized Shapiro and Kelly as being too conservative on key issues. And while Shapiro has emerged as a favorite of the party's pro-Israel donors, some progressive activists have objected to his stance on Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Meanwhile, a group of progressive donors have been making the push for Walz, even though Minnesota is unlikely to play a critical role in Harris's path to the White House. A compromise candidate could be Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who has fans among both liberal and centrist Democratic donors. He's not known to have been in D.C. yesterday. The contenders will be told either tonight or tomorrow morning whether or not they'll be on the ticket. And Harris's VP pick is expected to be on stage at a rally with Harris tomorrow night in Philadelphia. This morning, stock markets tumbled across Asia as news about the U.S. economy has rattled investors. The declines were most dramatic in Japan, where one major index dropped 12%, its biggest one-day loss in more than 3 decades. Globally, investors are panicking over signs that the American economy, the largest in the world, could be cooling. On Friday, the U.S. jobs report showed that hiring slowed significantly in July, and the U.S. unemployment rate hit a 3-year high. The stock declines are expected to continue in Europe and the U.S. as markets opened there this morning.
We are looking at potentially really significant flooding that will happen, particularly in north central Florida, as this storm makes landfall in Florida and then heads northeast.
Hurricane Debbie is expected to make landfall on Florida's Gulf Coast this morning after rapidly gaining strength and becoming a Category 1 storm. Debbie will hit along a stretch of coast that was devastated just a year ago by Hurricane Idalia. Its wind speeds are lower, but Hurricane Debbie is expected to bring much more rain to the region as it moves slowly across Florida and the north into Georgia and South Carolina in the coming days. Up to 30 inches of rain could fall in some places, and the National Hurricane Center warned that rainfall totals could be, quote, historic. In the Middle East, the wait for major retaliatory strikes is stretching into a new week. Iran and its proxy forces have been planning an attack on Israel after the recent killings of a top Hezbollah commander and the political leader of Hamas. Over the weekend, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country was prepared for any scenario, both offensively and defensively. The threat of an escalating regional war has set off alarm bells. The U.S. urged its citizens to leave Lebanon immediately. France told its citizens to leave Iran as soon as possible. And multiple international airlines have suspended flights to and from Israel. Meanwhile, Israel has continued its attacks in Gaza. In the last few days, dozens of people have been killed as Israel carried out strikes on 3 schools that were functioning as shelters. The deadliest came yesterday in Gaza City. According to Palestinian authorities, an Israeli F-16 fighter jet targeted a school, killing 30 people, most of them women and children. One survivor of the attack said he had just sat down for a meal with his family when the school was hit, saying it, quote, felt like we were burning, as if a volcano had erupted over us. The Israeli military said there was a Hamas command center at the school and that it took steps to mitigate civilian casualties. It's unclear if any of the people killed were militants. Today in Bangladesh, thousands of protesters have streamed into the capital city of Dhaka to march on the prime minister's home and demand her resignation. The country's been engulfed in protests for weeks, and the government has responded with a brutal crackdown. Nearly 100 people were killed yesterday. 200 were killed last month. Over 10,000 have been arrested. The protests began as a peaceful demonstration by students who are frustrated over how civil service jobs are assigned. But they've turned into violent clashes.
The police and all shades of security forces have been deployed on the streets of Dhaka in heavy numbers. So it's setting up to be a tense showdown in a protest that's already been quite deadly.
Mujib Mashal has been covering the protests for The Times.
This protest movement may have started about a particular issue, the jobs in the civil service, but it's become about much more than that. It's become about what's been sort of an entrenched authoritarianism during the 15 years of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. In her time in office, particularly in recent years, she has shrunk any space for free speech. She has cracked down on her opposition in a way where she's bogged them down in court cases, and sort of every time they've tried to hold protests, she's cracked down on them. So it feels that it is as much a more widespread anger over her authoritarian tendencies, but also over her mismanagement of the economy, because the economy is stagnating now, and a lot of people are feeling the pinch of it. On the government's part, Prime Minister Hasina has blamed the violence and the protests on her sort of sworn political enemies. She says this is not an organic student protest, these are extremist groups, and that is spreading what was a centralized, peaceful protest on one issue into the kind of situation that is difficult to contain. So it's created a especially dangerous phase right now in the country.
And finally, in Paris this weekend, the race for fastest man in the world came down to a photo finish.
They're watching, they're looking. Who has got this?
In the 100-meter dash, the U.S.'s Noah Lyles spent most of the race at the back of the pack before surging in the final moments and crossing the finish line at nearly the same time as Jamaica's Kashane Thompson. Their race took less than 10 seconds, but examining the footage to figure out who won took longer.
Lyles had the momentum and he's got it. Unbelievable.
Ultimately, Lyles was declared the winner by 0.005 of a second. For the fastest woman in the world, their 100-meter race took place in the rain, and St. Lucia's Julian Alfred took the gold. She beat out Team USA's Sha'Carri Richardson, who had been the favorite. Richardson took silver. And today, Simone Biles will put on her last performance in Paris, with the finals in women's floor exercise and balance beam. Those are the headlines. Today on The Daily, a former close friend of Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance shares a first-person account of how Vance's politics have evolved. You can listen on the Times audio app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Tracy Mumford. We'll be back tomorrow.